Nigel Strauss has been a psychiatrist for over 45 years. He trained at the Jung Institute in Zurich, spent decades working with veterans, bushfire survivors, and families from Port Arthur, and was among the first Australian psychiatrists trained in psychedelic-assisted therapy by the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. He's been a psychotherapist on Australia's first approved psilocybin trial for end-of-life anxiety and depression, and personally sponsored a Monash University trial giving MDMA-assisted therapy to 25 veterans and first responders with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. His own LSD experience as a depressed medical student set him on this path decades before any of it was legal, and now he's practicing in a country where psychedelics are legal medicine, but still widely misunderstood. I'm Aidan Mill, and this is Uncomfortably Curious. At what point did you start to feel the, psychedelic thread pulling at you? Was it a bit of a slow drift in, or was it a specific moment?
Well, the history of psychedelics is a long one, and my history with psychedelics is a long one too, Aidan. I can't say that it's been gradual over the last few years because I was around back in the 60s and 70s. And back then, psychedelics or psychedelic treatment was legal, and it was a big sort of cultural change in the use of these drugs, particularly LSD, which was a synthetic psychedelic. So back then, to give you a full account of my relationship with psychedelics and to be honest and upfront, and I've talked about this before, so it's no big secret, I was a medical student back in the 60s, and I struggled with being a medical student. It wasn't what I thought it would be. I persevered, as you can tell. I'm a doctor, but I had some dark years as a medical student, and LSD was something that I believe I was depressed at that time, and LSD was something that helped me an awful lot. In that it made me become aware of certain aspects of my life and what was important to me, and it sent me off in a particular direction, which I've sort of maintained throughout most of my life. So I had an early association with psychedelics, and as you probably know, they became illegal. And so, not that I used huge amounts, but I did have some experiences which were very interesting and very helpful for me and really improved my well-being. And then many years later, I became associated with them again, and that's probably what your question's focused on. So with that experience as background, I have been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've assessed and managed many people who've had post-traumatic stress disorder. I saw a lot of veterans, Vietnamese veterans and veterans from the Middle East. I've seen many survivors of bushfires. I was involved in the Port Arthur situation where there was a horrible massacre, and I assessed many of the survivors and families of people who had unfortunately been massacred there. And I've seen people who've been in plane crashes, car crashes, all sorts of things. There's a classic joke that I crack is my wife feels that my career has been a series of disasters, and it has some days been like that. But what I learned from that, Aidan, was that many people who develop genuine post-traumatic stress disorder don't respond very well to the treatments that are available, mainly psychotherapy and antidepressants. And I became very aware of that over the years, and it was a great cause of concern for me. And back about 15 years ago, I became aware that an organisation in America, the MAPS they're called, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Science, were doing work there using MDMA, which is on the street, as you know, ecstasy or called Molly, using MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, and they were getting interesting and good results. Early days, back some years ago, MAPS has been led by a bloke called Rick Doblin, who's quite an outstanding guy who has been advocating for the use of psychedelics for psychiatric problems for many years. And Rick was promoting this and encouraging this and raising money for the research and so forth. And he enlisted a psychiatrist called Michael Mithofer, who did a lot of the early research. Anyway, I found out about this. I contacted them, and Rick Doblin was in Australia. I met Rick Doblin in Melbourne. I became very interested in getting involved in what they were doing. And in 2014, I went over to England and did a training program to become an MDMA assisted psychotherapy therapist. It was a very interesting, formative 7 to 10 days we spent over there. We saw a lot of cases on video that had been treated with MDMA, and I was really impressed. And so when I got back to Australia, I was keen to initiate a similar research program in Australia. And there were a group of people here already interested, a group called PRISM, with some good people there who I've known since that time. And I, at that stage, was also a professor at Deakin University in Geelong, looking at cultural trauma. And I thought, well, let's try and do this research down at Deakin. And we produced a protocol. We were going to treat servicemen who had PTSD. And on the night before the protocol was to be delivered to the ethics committee for assessment, I was sent an email by the professor of research down at Deakin saying, look, MAPS, we understand MAPS encourages illicit behaviour and encourages illegal activities, blah, 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 because of their association with psychedelics, and we're not going to have a bar of it, and you can see you later, which was really disappointing, but not surprising, considering 2015 was a very different zeitgeist to the psychedelic zeitgeist now. So what happened then was that for a number of years we published papers, we advocated, I went to conferences and gave talks, and they were difficult years because psychedelics were not fashionable, and you were seen to be rather left of centre. I was seen to be left of centre doing what I was doing, but I persisted, and I was determined to get this trial up. In about 2020, 21, I think, a trial was allowed at St Vincent's Hospital for using psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of end-of-life anxiety and depression. And I'm a consultant at St V's, and I was lucky enough to be a therapist in that was the first Australian trial. So things were starting to move, and I knew a lot of the people in the area, and eventually I was able to initiate an MDMA-assisted psychotherapy trial. But before I did that, I wrote a book actually called The Asylum Seekers. In my frustration when I was rejected by Deakin, I wrote this book called The Asylum Seekers, based on my clinical contact with veterans. I wrote a book about a veteran who got physically and psychologically injured in Afghanistan, and how he came back to Australia, and his whole life was upside down, and he didn't get the treatment he needed. It didn't end particularly well, but it was a sort of catharsis for me, and people have read the book and like the book. It's called The Asylum Seekers. Anyway, so I was able to initiate a trial. It lingered for 5 years, and about 2021, a colleague of mine at Monash, Paul Ignatski, who runs the psychedelic lab there, we initiated a trial. I actually sponsored the trial. I gave them a lot of money. I was determined to get the trial up. And that trial took a long time to progress. It's just finished this year. Paul's off in, I think, Amsterdam, presenting the results of that trial. They treated 25 first responders and veterans with PTSD, and the results have been fantastic. Not everybody has recovered, but the large majority have done very well. And I'm a clinician, not a researcher. I knew in my heart back in 2015 that this was going to work, but Dr. Strauss telling people that that's going to work is not enough evidence. We need evidence. And so this trial, my biggest problem is impatience, which makes me a terrible researcher. I'm just a horribly impatient person. But anyway, I've stayed the journey, and this trial's proven what I felt was right. And also, as you know, Aidan, now in Australia, we're allowed to some of us are allowed to prescribe MDMA for treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's a group over in Perth, and they're also in Queensland and now Victoria, I think, who have treated 100 people with PTSD. These findings were presented at the Psychiatric Congress in Melbourne a few weeks ago. And they've been getting really good results too. So I'm really delighted that so many people now who might not have been helped because of the problems with the old types of treatment are now being helped. And I'm greatly reassured that MDMA will become an established treatment for PTSD, which is, as you know, there's a lot of it, not just in Australia but around the world. And we're leading in that sort of area in Australia as far as putting it into clinical practice, because some of us, including myself, are authorised to prescribe it. So that's the MDMA story. MDMA is not a true psychedelic. We could talk for hours about what is a true psychedelic. It certainly changes consciousness, and its effects allow people with MDMA to ventilate and reprocess their trauma, whereas a lot of other treatments don't allow that. EMDR is good, but MDMA is a really good treatment. Anyway, so that's really a very quick snapshot of some of my involvement in all of this.
No, it's amazing. It's like you mentioned, it can a lot's happened already, but obviously the future is very, very exciting for what the potential is in Australia and all around the world. That sort of flows into what I was wanting to ask you next. Is I've seen some of your writing. You've called the drugs, psychedelic drugs, the drugs of meaning and connection. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of psychiatry is based on the treatment of symptoms. Someone's depressed, they're crying, they can't sleep, there's self-harm, those sorts of things. And we in psychiatry are not good at working out what causes psychiatric illness. We tend to go to the other end of it and look at the symptoms and not only treat the symptoms, but put those symptoms in boxes and reach diagnoses. The famous manual, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, is our Bible, psychiatry's Bible, and all the diagnoses are in there. And it's getting bigger every publication. It's a huge thing now. It's also, as an aside, one of the best-selling books in America, the DSM. But that's another story about our therapy culture. But I've always felt, and I'm not the only one, and I'm not unique in this, but I've always felt that we really need to look at psychological illness in other ways, not just as a bunch of symptoms that we've got to treat usually with medication or with TMS or with ECT or with ketamine or whatever it might be. I mean, those treatments are valid and they do help people, but there are a number of people, I believe, and not only individuals, but collectively, I think our culture is in great need of having, what's the best way of expressing this? Having some sort of overarching mythology or ideology or some sort of narrative that helps people survive in an ever-changing and stressful world. Traditionally, as this is not rocket science again, but religions used to do that. We're far more secular, particularly in countries like Australia, and people have lost their sense of meaning. Now, what do I mean by meaning? I think meaning really means connection, and if you're well connected in the sense that you have interpersonal connections, maybe connections to nature, connections to your work, all those sort of ideologies, things that are of value. Then you are connected, and often those sort of people are doing quite well from a mental health perspective. But if you're living a sort of life of the individualistic life that a lot of people, we're encouraged to do that now. We're all sort of products. We've got to sell ourselves. We've got to market ourselves. The aim is to be an influencer and all that sort of stuff. It's a sort of isolated existence, and what throws fuel on the fire, I think, is social media. Even people here we are, you're in your room, I'm in my room, and we're all sort of isolated. We look at flat screens, but it is a two-dimensional lifestyle, Yeah,
it's not the same.
It's not the same, and so it's isolating, and it limits connections in all sorts of ways. And so I think that there is this loss of meaning. I think people, the only real meaning, the only thing standing, as a friend of mine says, is materialism, and in particular money. Everybody wants to make lots of money and then your problems are solved. But that, and I'm not saying money's a bad thing. We do need it, and a certain standard of living is good for mental health. I don't think anyone would deny that. But there's so much focus on it that the means have become the ends, and we've lost sort of vision of what the ends might be. Now, I'm a bit of an idealist because I like to talk about virtue and doing the right thing and helping people. I'm not saying I'm necessarily any more virtuous than anyone else, but it's an aim that I think is important in people's lives, because I think where virtue comes from is through connection. That if you understand that we're all in the same boat, we're all in the same world, and we're all trying to live a life, and that life is probably a lot easier if we do it together rather than as individuals. But the way our society is sort of framed at the moment is that we're all really in it for what we can get out of it. And that's a terrible generalisation, and there's a hell of a lot of good people out there and blah, blah, blah. But that's the sort of feel you get from society, Western society at the moment. And I think that's got a lot to do with why there's so much unhappiness and mental illness, is that people they're not anchored to anything. And I'm not just talking about ideology and religion. I'm also talking about family. Families ain't what they used to be. Extended families used to be very supportive of all the members. I remember as a young psychiatrist talking to people who had emigrated from Greece to Australia, and you'd ask them, well, do you have any? And they all had huge extended family. Would anybody in your family have psychiatric illness? And they look at you as if you're an idiot. I mean, what is? And that raises this issue of over medicalisation now. Psychiatry sort of put its arms out and embraced all this sort of challenging life behaviour, which causes us, we all get upset and depressed and freaked out and all that sort of. But it's all psychiatric illness. It's not a product of cultural. A cultural problem, it's not a product of those sorts of feelings are really very much to do with lack of support that we all have. And, particularly I feel, I see it too with teenagers and adolescents, and you might see it too, where, you have these 15-year-olds, not the ones who are running around stealing things and beating people up and hitting them with machetes, but that's one end of the spectrum. But there's a lot of kids out there with self-harm. They have gender issues. They're anxious. They want to go on tablets. All that sort of stuff, much more than 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I think connection and meaning, loss of connection and meaning, have a lot to do with this sort of social upset. And so, to answer your question, sorry, I gave you a really long answer.
No, go for it.
To answer your question, psychedelic drugs, what they do is they intensify the perception of meaning. When you're under the influence of a psychedelic drug, not for everybody, and when I say they do this, I should say right from the word go that psychedelics are not for everybody. They have different effects on different individuals, and we need to do more research on all that. But for some people, when they're under the influence of a psychedelic, they have a profound sense of meaning, as if they're connected to something bigger than themselves, usually something bigger than themselves. There's not that, it probably happens, but there aren't that many people who take LSD and suddenly want to go out and make $2 billion. That doesn't happen so much. They're more likely to want to go out and embrace a tree, if I can use that sort of metaphor. That they feel this overwhelming sense of connection with the world, and it's often a very positive experience. Not always. Some people have bad experiences, but there's a sense of awe and wonder, and a way of seeing the world. It's a non-ordinary state of consciousness that can inform people that there is more to life than consumerism and materialism. So that sort of meaning can be encouraged by psychedelics. But the key to it too, of course, is we talk about psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. The psychotherapy is important. So people become more suggestible under the influence. So you could set up a situation where you encourage them to do evil things and mean things. The psychedelic itself isn't a virtue drug. It doesn't make you do the right thing, but under the right circumstances and in the right place, the right setting, we call it, and with the right mental set, people can be helped to get greater insight, awareness, and wisdom.
Is that sorry to cut you off, but is that, do you think, well, I don't know if we actually know the science underlying it, but is that thought to be because it sort of opens up more neuroplasticity in the brain, or why is that the case, do you think?
Well, don't get me started on neurotransmitters and neuroplasticity. That's not my area. I tend to be over on the sort of psychotherapy. Possibly neuroplasticity. I think it's to do with connection. If you look at a brain scan of someone who's on psychedelics, all these things link up, much more parts of the brain link up which are normally not connected. So there's more opportunity for the brain to open up the doors of perception, to see things in a much more global way, and there isn't that sort of filtration that you get from concepts, because from the word go, when we're born, we're taught concepts and ways of seeing things. The brain has to operate that way for efficiency. You see a dog, there's a dog, you don't look at every dog and look at every feature, but you get up in the morning to go to work, it's raining, you just put your head down, you get the train, you get to work. But if you wake up in Paris on holidays with your beautiful wife, you see the world totally differently, so the setting and the set is important too. So that's how I think psychedelics work. They give you a new perspective.
Yep. And were you, like, obviously I'm sort of splitting your career into two here, pre when you were, actually looking, like, doing research into psychedelics, and when you were, say in the last few decades working as a psychiatrist, but were you already convinced that there was that meaning sort of disconnect in your patients prior to the introduction of, using psychedelics more, or has that sort of, really sort of changed the way that you see your work and what the benefit can be?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think working with psychedelics has made me think about psychedelics a lot and how they work. And in order to do that, you can't just, for me anyway, you can't just take a biomedical approach. I've taken it's philosophical, it's theological, it's anthropological. It's really broadened the way I want to see things. Not that I wasn't interested in those things all along, but with psychedelics creating a sort of mystical experience, my challenge now is how do we integrate that into psychiatry? Psychiatry is not really big on mysticism and those sorts of things. It's very biomedical. It didn't used to be. I studied at the Jung Institute, and Jung was very interested in spiritual issues, but got blasted for doing it, and was really unpopular because he did that. People just think he was, Jung was not by any means perfect, but he was interesting in that he opened up these spiritual, theological issues in relation to people's mental state. And he would advocate people taking a spiritual or religious approach to life if they possibly could, to give them a bigger picture of what we're doing here. And I think that's really, I'm not Jung, but I think that that's really what I'm interested in trying to do. So my writing tends to be broader than just looking at it from a psychiatric perspective alone.
Yeah, yep. Some of that, I think it's the Jungian language that you're speaking about. I guess I find it very interesting too, and it seems like, at least in some circles, there's more. Like, he's made a bit of a resurgence in certain parts of culture in the last sort of 5-10 years. I've heard him, his work being spoken about a lot more frequently. I always struggle with some of the terms that, like, what do they actually mean and how do they connect to people? Like, in some of your writing, even it's hard to obviously put your finger on the pulse of what's actually going on, but sort of things like the collective unconscious, ego dissolution, all these, and like archetypal language where it's really interesting, and it's sort of that storytelling background you see coming to the forefront, but it's also a bit hard to grasp with what does that actually mean?
Look, I think, and the reason for that is because we're describing the subjective, trying to categorize it and put words to it. But it's like love, money, psychedelics, all those sorts of things. You can't really define them absolutely. Everybody has their own subjective understanding of those things, and that's a real challenge. And I think at the end of the day, there's two ways of looking at the world, really. One of them is scientifically, which is to objectify things and do that sort of quantitative research, and the other way is the sort of subjective approach, which is, I use the word mysticism, but you're talking about things that can never really be adequately defined. So religions tend to talk about myths and narratives, and they give you explanations for the mystery, because life's about mystery. I don't think science can solve all the problems of understanding what the hell we're doing here. I don't think it ever will. I think science should accept that there will always be mystery about our experience and our existence. Religion and spirituality try and put stories and narratives to help explain and to give you some sort of understanding. And I think the way I like to look at the world is through both of those lenses, and both of them should have some sort of claim of humility, to accept that science should accept that it's never going to get to the bottom of everything, and religion can give us, hopefully, stories that will help us to accept the mystery, but also to add a bit of morality and virtue into it, so we behave ourselves, and that sort of connectedness helps us to want to behave ourselves, that we feel that's the right way of doing it. I mean, to just take it one step further, I've just written a paper on psychedelics and soul. Now, soul, S-O-U-L, is not something that psychiatry really will accept with open arms. But I think that soul is a really good word, because it's a word that can't be defined. It's an attitude. It's not. I don't think soul is some sort of concrete thing. I think it's an attitude, a way of seeing the world, and I think it bridges that gap between science and religion. And so psychiatry, if it's going to adopt psychedelics, we'll need to have some sort of terminology, because we're looking at both science and spirituality, because psychedelics promote spirituality, spiritual feelings and understandings. And all of these things are very difficult to describe. And I probably a lot of people think I'm a bit wacko. That would be the first time that I've said that, but that's fine. I think what I'm talking about is experiential stuff. I've been one of the things I learned from psychedelics as a young man was being interested in non-ordinary states of consciousness. That's what we're talking about, non-ordinary states of consciousness. And how do you define those? Very difficult. But meditation's been very helpful for me, because it's a sort of a study of your own mental processes, and a calming of your mental processes. And that's a natural way of developing non-ordinary states of consciousness, which can give you great insight, I believe. So all these things are sort of related in a way, and when I write about psychedelics, these other things come up because I think they're relevant. But I don't expect everybody to understand what I'm saying, and I try and make it as clear as possible, but I don't expect everyone to agree with me either. Why would they? But you do what you can, and you try and be honest with yourself and others. But we're still, with psychedelics, a long way away from understanding how we can integrate them into our society for the good of society, if indeed we can. And that's the sort of research I'm interested in at the moment.
It's incredibly interesting. I would like to talk about the first maybe sort of study you were involved with at St. V's a little bit. So, both from what you actually found as part of that research, but also from a personal side of things, and how that impacted you in, your own thought process around, because a lot of those, was it all of the patients were terminal, or were they end of life anxiety, or was it a bit of a mixture?
Mostly end of life anxiety and depression. Yeah. Most of them had terminal diagnoses, and a few of them died as the research was going on. Okay,
so that that would have been pretty powerful in lots of different ways. But did it greatly impact your views on mortality and your own death, seeing those people in those circumstances?
Yeah, I think whenever you think about death, you think about your own death pretty much, and if you see it in your face, or you lose someone close to you or people you know, I think it's natural to think about death. And I think for I know this sounds a bit glib, but for a successful life, I think to live successfully, you should think about death a fair bit, because we're all going to go through it. It was really interesting. First of all, it was the first trial, and it was really interesting to be legally able to, give people psilocybin. It's a true psychedelic, and to see the reaction. It didn't help everybody, but it helped some people come to terms with death. And I think the main thing for those that it helped significantly was that they could see beyond their own egos. So when I talk about egos and breaking down the ego, but what happens is that your sense of who you are dissipates to a large extent, and you feel merged with your environment, your situation, the world in general. And that can be quite a profound and uplifting experience. It can be frightening and challenging, but it can also be liberating in the sense that suddenly you're no longer the centre of the world. You're just part of the world. And if you look at more traditional cultures who have initiation processes, usually what happens when people get to their teenage years, Aboriginals and North Americans and lots of cultures, they're put through very rigorous experiences which can be life-threatening and certainly frightening, and it's to break down the ego, to get people to realise that there's more to the world than just themselves, and that they're part of the big tribe, and they're very much part of a union or a group of people. We don't have that so much. We have vestiges of that, baptisms and bar mitzvahs and things like that, but we don't have, unless you join the army at 14 and you're really put through it and you have to go and, we don't have that in our lives now. And I think that that's part of the individualistic society that we live in. But a psychedelic can break that down, even though it might be painful and challenging, and make you see that you're just a part of the world rather than, as I said before, the centre of the world. And that can be quite liberating. And people can accept death much more easily when they see that, because, death is giving up your ego, giving up yourself, giving up who you are, and the end of it. Now, you can have a religious idea or an ideological idea that you're going to heaven, or that you're going to float around on a cloud all day with a harp, whatever it might be. Or I better not go take that any further, because the next might be a bit controversial. But if you don't value yourself too much, if you can be humble, then you look back on your life, you've contributed, you've done what you can do, and then you just join up, your molecules go off and you just become part of the world. But you've got to appreciate that the world is a beautiful place and will go on without you in one sense, but we'll still include you because you're just part of the whole thing. So it's really a realisation that you as an individual are really not that important, even if you think you are, and to be at peace with that, and I think that's the giving up process. And I think psychedelics can very much help with that. That altered state of consciousness can make you see that. I talk about it sounds a bit superficial, but if you have the experience, you may actually appreciate what I'm trying to say.
Mm. And that, obviously, some of those end-of-life patients, I can imagine the level of fear and anxiety was quite significant to start with, because let's see, understandably, but how quickly or was there a specific moment when you started to see that shift, or was it sort of just after the experience that they had, they were just in a much, more at peace position?
Yeah, if they have, look, not everyone has a profound experience on psychedelics, but if they did, then they would pretty quickly come to see what I've been talking about and have that experience. It can be it can happen quite quickly. It might take weeks or months as well, and that's why we always have what we call integration, where people are followed up and they can integrate their insights that they may have gained in the experience into their life, or what's left of their life, and come to terms with that. So it can be very stress relieving for a lot of people who are facing death. As I said, it's not for everyone. I don't advocate it for everyone, but for suitable people, I think it can be very helpful. And I at the moment, the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Authority, are looking at whether they'll make it legal for psychiatrists, authorised prescribers, to prescribe for that indication. I'm getting mixed feedback about whether they will or not. I can't see why they won't, but they might be a bit too scared to take it that next step. But it would be great if they could, because really, with people who are dying, you've got 6 to 12 months to live. I mean, what do you got to lose? You know, I mean, really, you're going to. I mean, you haven't got a lot to lose. So I hope they do. And I've put in a submission. There's a inquiry going on, and we'll see what happens. But it'll happen eventually.
Yeah. Okay. I've always wondered what in some of those sessions is there like a rule book where you're sort of following a certain like process step by step, or is it more just you're being guided by what the patient is experiencing and then asking sort of questions and things? Like, how does that actually work?
Yeah, well, what we have a number of preliminary sessions with the person before we dose them with the psilocybin. I should say the MDMA is pretty sort of set. So what happens in an MDMA session for someone with PTSD is that they are aware that they've got to go and reprocess their experiences. So they have to bring up their experiences and go through it all again, which they, without MDMA, they find very difficult, and that's why they can't be helped. With MDMA, they're able to go in and reprocess the trauma, and that can be extremely helpful. But that's MDMA. Psilocybin is much more laissez-faire. We prepare people. We tell them that they'll have perceptual experiences probably, that they might have profound experiences. It can be very challenging for them to deal with the challenges appropriately. We also ask them about what are their intentions. What do they hope to achieve from this experience? And so they're very aware of their intentions. But generally speaking, we let them just rock and roll. We just let them go in there. They listen to music. They close their eyes. It's usually in a darkened room, and they have an experience. Some are profound, some are not. Some are very helpful, some are not. Some are very challenging. We don't know what's going to happen, and we say that to people. We don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully it'll be a positive experience. And it might take weeks, if not months, for it to shine through. People sometimes come out of it pretty numbed and stunned, and they don't know what to do with that sort of experience. But with the right integration following the dosing, they can be helped to gain insight into what they might have gone through and what they might have seen. You mentioned the collective unconscious before. People have all sorts of archetypal experiences, and that's what Jung was on about with the collective unconscious. It's an unconscious that we all share, but it's very deep. And various artifacts various archetypes like the Great Mother, the Father, the Trickster, all these sorts of different archetypes, Jung wrote about them a lot, can show their faces, and they can be guides for us and tell us a little bit about our personal life and the way we fit into the world. So there's all sorts of experiences that can happen, but they might have to be interpreted afterwards over a period of time. So we follow people up and we help them with all of that over that period of time.
And do we have any way of knowing who may benefit more at the moment, or like you said before, is it just a trial and error sort of thing?
No, it's not a trial and error. There are people who are excluded because of physical illness, heart problems, liver problems, that sort of thing. We exclude people who have substance abuse disorders. We exclude people who have had psychotic conditions. We're not confident enough to give it to people with psychotic conditions or bipolar conditions or even personality disorders. So by law, we're only allowed to really treat people with treatment-resistant depression who haven't responded to a number of treatments. Now, I know one of the things you want to talk about is really who's suitable for this, and have I changed my mind on anything? One of the reasons I've been sort of behind all this for a long time is because I thought that we could get it across the line if we said to the powers that be, we believe that these drugs can treat these conditions that wouldn't otherwise respond to the treatments we have available. And that's worked with PTSD and MDMA, as I said earlier. I'm delighted about that. But with psilocybin, I'm not convinced that necessarily it's going to help people with treatment-resistant depression, people with significant, long-standing depression. It might help some, but I'm of the opinion that it's probably a drug that's going to help people with life challenges, confusion, self-image problems, end-of-life anxiety problems, those sorts of things, not profound depression where people are really, laid low by their depression. And I also believe that psilocybin should be made available under strict and safe conditions for people who want to improve their circumstances, want to gain insight, want to improve their well-being, maybe their creativity. So I'm much more interested these days in treating people, in looking at research into how we can improve well-being and maybe nature-relatedness or pro-social behaviour with psychedelics. I think that they may well be more helpful for society in that way rather than as a psychiatric treatment. But that's the next hurdle. That might take another 10 or 20 years. I don't know whether I'll still be here to advocate for that, but that's really what I'm interested in at the moment. I think ultimately that's how they'll prove to be effective. And in fact, it's already happening in Oregon. You can now, if you meet certain criteria, I don't know what they are, you can pay someone and go and have a supervised session with psilocybin.
Well, like I said, leads into the sort of down scheduling in Australia a few years ago, and I guess some of the pushback that happened with the, I guess, being able to, the permit that was it down to schedule 8 from 9. Is that yeah. So I think some people were sort of worried that it would be a bit too easy to access and the regulations wouldn't be there to make sure that you were sitting with a qualified, experienced practitioner. Do you see both sides of that? Like obviously the promising aspects, but yeah, the potential downside there.
Oh yeah. I'm not for a moment. I don't for a moment advocate getting rid of regulations and science. We need to do this empirically, scientifically. Of course, regulations are messy. They're always messy. For a little while there weren't that many regulations, but what's happened, I think, is the regulations have been tightened up, and the places where we can treat people with these drugs, it's harder to get permission to do it in places away from hospitals and big clinics. And that's going to be a little bit of a stop to some of the work that needs to be done. I think that really the dosing with psilocybin should be done in places of great beauty in nature. I don't really think they fit that comfortably into hospitals and clinics. So, you go there, you have a psychedelic experience, and then you get the tram home. It seems to me that that's not quite the way it should be done, even if it's a treatment. That, yep. I think that nature, I'm a great advocate of nature, and I think that nature should be a part of all this, and that these experiences should be done in a natural, beautiful environment. I'm not for a moment saying those environments shouldn't be safe. They should be safe, and the people who are doing the administration should know what they're doing, all that. So that's all still being sorted out by the TGA, and we've still got a way to go to get it right. I think probably we're being more careful than we need to. I don't think psychedelics are all that dangerous, but they can affect people badly. And so it's probably best to err on the side of caution. And I'm not criticising the way it's rolling out. It's rolling out pretty slowly. It's a lot of bureaucracy if you want to be an authorised prescriber. But it's rolling out. And I think that's a great start to this process.
I've seen you write about how your connection with nature has been quite profound for you, and is that directly related to your work specifically, or because you spent a lot of your younger years working like in a city, didn't you? And then you've obviously transitioned more to being more rural, and I think you planted lots of trees at your property as well, which I mean that connects with me quite a lot because I grew up grew up on the Wombat State Forest, so in the bush every day. So I find that quite resonates a lot with me, and the connection that you feel to being out in nature and just I guess I don't even know how to describe it. It's just that sense that you get when you're out there.
Look, absolutely. So I said to you that psychedelics, when as a young man, set me in a particular direction. One of them was to meditate, which has been very helpful. But the other one was nature. I mean, I was a city slicker up until those experiences, and then as soon as I could, I went out to the country and bought some land and planted a whole lot of trees. And then I got involved in the green movement, and I stood for Parliament on a couple of occasions on green issues. Fortunately, I didn't win. Excuse me. But I've always felt that nature, for me anyway, is a very healing thing, and I think it is for a lot of people. And I think we're so urbanised, even just living in high-rise apartments and not getting out of the city, and everything's air conditioned. I don't think our bodies are really supposed to be doing a lot of that stuff, and also physical activity. I mean, these are all things that everybody knows, but to get stuck in the city, particularly a city like Melbourne, which is huge, isn't good. At the end of the day, isn't good for your health. And I think going out into nature is a good thing. But we're lucky in Melbourne. We've got some great parks. Walking through the park can be very healing too. My favourite place in Melbourne is the Botanic Gardens. I think we've been given the great gift in this city, and I go there as often as I can because, if I have being a psychiatrist, the other thing is being a psychiatrist, you're dealing with unhappy people. It's the nature of your job. And so I find trees they don't talk to you, but they can be very friendly and they can be very supportive, and they just make me feel good, So I love nature and will continue to do so. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to run my clinic in that sort of environment, which is really nice.
Probably word I'd come to mind after I thought about it was be connection, I guess. When you're in nature, you do feel that sense of connection and sort of tapped into that oneness, I guess, for lack of a better term. With your specifically, obviously, the sessions working with patients with, doesn't have to be psychedelics even, but is there sort of one or two sessions that you still think about regularly that sort of come back to you and in ways that it's actually changed yourself and your view on certain things? If you're happy to go into those details.
With psychedelics, you mean? Or
probably, if you had one that came to mind, but I mean, it doesn't have to be, because it's obviously all about seeing how, powerful experiences.
Without going into any specific cases, what's fascinated me working with psychedelics is that people do have and it's happened to other therapists too, that people go back into they can go back into their time when they were in their mother's womb, and even back before that. It sounds a bit wacky, but in fact, people do have those experiences. How realistic they are, I don't know, but they seem to have a great effect on people. And the case that I'm thinking of, the woman really came to terms with her relationship with her mother and even her grandfather, who had been in a concentration camp. And, the realizations that she was able to obtain from that psychedelic experience were really amazing and really profound. She experienced things that she had no idea she would experience, and it really helped her in a big way, and her life changed as a result. So although not everybody has those experiences, and I keep saying that it's not for everybody, I think what we need to do with research is to work out to know before they take the medication, how can we predict whether people will have these experiences or not? Is it just trial or an error, or is it something else? And I think I have a few criteria that I look at: people's ability to emotionally regulate, that they don't flip out too easily, because it can be challenging. People who are good at forming relationships, either with family and friends, and are good at forming a relationship with their therapist. People who have some sort of spiritual or philosophical framework to life, so that when they do have a non-ordinary state of consciousness, they can navigate it more effectively. They're more flexible, because some people come out of a transcendent experience and they say, what the hell was that? They can't relate to it. They have it, but it just leaves them high and dry, and they don't know what's happened. So there's a whole lot of criteria like that I sort of advocate and look for in the people that I might treat with psychedelics. I think that they're important. I think it's important that we look at that to avoid problems and to find and not waste our time, because it's a lot of work sitting there for 6 or 8 hours with people. It's a whole day, and it's exhausting, not to mention all the stuff you've done before it and all the stuff you do after it. So we have to be circumspect about it.
I read one of your blog posts about that, in terms of what sort of, I guess, traits or characteristics that a person should have going in that would maybe make it a bit better experience. And I think one of the top ones that you wrote was sort of, just being curious. Yeah.
Being curious, I think. And usually people who are curious are seekers, if you know what I mean by seekers. I'm a seeker. I think I've always wanted to know what the hell we're doing here. Where the old questions: where are we coming from? What are we doing here? How are we supposed to live? Those sorts of things are really prominent in my life. Probably one of the reasons I became a psychiatrist. And those questions never go away. You never get absolute answers to them. But for me, it's been a life challenge, and something that really I base my life on, and all the work I've done with psychedelics and the writing I've done, all based around those questions. And then when I look back at stuff I've written 5 or 10 years ago, it's not much different to the stuff I'm writing now. So I wrote all this already. I've written all this already, but it's just this constant circulation and searching, and it probably indicates that I still haven't worked everything out, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of it. Is actually it's not about finding the thing; it's just the actual process of seeking. And I would probably describe myself as a similar vein, which is why I've sort of started the podcast. Actually, just curious, hearing about what people do and their experience of life, and any any reflections and advice they can give me really. But it's fascinating work, Nigel. I really appreciate your time today. It sounds like, I'm going to obviously look into a lot more of what you've been doing and monitor the space quite closely, because it's probably, the next 5 or 10 years are quite exciting, I would assume.
Yeah, I think it is very exciting, and I think it really appeals to your generation too. I think, there's always that need to understand what life's all about. And I think we really live, I might be an old man speaking, but we are living in turbulent times, lots of change, insecurity, lots of challenges, and people are looking for meaning and reasons, and they're hard to find. The problem, one of the big problems is we haven't got a lot of leaders who are setting a good example. And if we had leaders who are setting a good example, I think it would be easier for some people, but there are not that many role models out there, and I think that's a pity. I think that's a great pity, because usually, not always, older people have some sort of wisdom which they should be able to share with younger people, and I think that should be an important part of any generation, any life that's being lived.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. Where should people go to sort of check out your work or stay connected with what you've got coming out?
My website, just nigelstrauss.com.au. All my writing's there. I've written a book called The Psychedelic Diary, and there's a lot of stuff in there along the lines of what we've been talking about. But that's on the website. You can download that for nothing. And I've written some other articles there too. So that's where you can read my stuff, and hopefully I'll be putting some new stuff up there soon.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Nigel. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Aidan. I enjoyed that.